black, you're white.
Now what? What if I say the wrong thing?
You probably will. Who doesn't? But I'll do my best to listen.
Maybe if we're humble enough to listen to each other.
Maybe if we're brave enough to lean into those difficult conversations.
We might.
We could.
Come up with some answers.
Make some real progress.
Discover how much we have in common.
And appreciate our differences.
Now you're talking.
I'm David Conley, communications consultant.
And I'm Chris Thurber, clinical psychologist.
And welcome to another episode of I'm Black, You're White, Now What? And today's guest is Brandon Thomas. Brandon is on the faculty at Exeter Academy.
Woo!
And is also, go Exeter! And in addition to teaching there, he's also a football and wrestling coach, so he's a stone killer. So we'll be having a great discussion with him. But Chris, I'd like to, just kind of recap our last episode and our great conversation, which was a very exciting episode, and had me thinking far after it was over with Rev Dustin Ward. And I really enjoyed just what his plans were for Maine, and just the ramifications of that type of thinking for the country as a whole. Just how can we think about actually bringing people together, not only socially, but economic initiatives, things that will enhance people's relations with each other, business-wise, politically. It was just a pretty comprehensive way of thinking about it, and the fact that thinking like that is coming out of some of the tragic things that are happening was, kind of inspiring by itself. I don't know.
It was inspiring, and also I think Dustin's devotion, dedication, his perseverance with the work that he's doing, and I was moved by his describing how he really felt a calling to the ministry, and when he had completed his training and was part of the Maine Baptist Church at a parish in Yarmouth and was loving that work, and with all that was happening now this spring with police violence against unarmed black men primarily, and some women, he wanted to communicate very clearly to his parishioners the importance of their awareness and their action. And when he did that, he got some sort of what he calls polite racism, some blowback that was, Reverend, that's all well and good, but it's a little too political. And I thought he made an extremely strong argument for how it's not political, it's
right.
Human. And whether you're religious or not, disregarding human life is a different kettle of fish. And he knew that he had to do something else, and made this career shift, which I think is a really gutsy thing to do, and to transform a mostly white state like Maine into a state of greater awareness and with greater self-awareness and sense of social responsibility is a formidable task. But, Dustin is organized. He is a man on a mission. He's got his business plan. He's got the 5-year vision. He's got the 10-year vision. So we hope to have him back on the show.
I thought it was interesting before we move into today's guest. I just want to say, I thought, speaking about that, the response from the church, I just think it's interesting how, and this is something for people to think about, I think, how committed we are until such time that commitment is called upon. I had a pastor tell me years ago that faith only matters when all seems hopeless, and so when everything is going well, faith is really a non-issue, but faith really matters then. So commitment only really matters when your commitment is called upon to whatever degree. You can talk about what you believe and all of this until such time as somebody says, hey, you know what, we probably need to, since we are people of faith, what do you say we do this, and then that's when you start seeing,
Right.
where the rubber meets the road. You start seeing where people are with regard to their hearts and their minds and all of that. And a lot of it is fear. And so I just thought it was that part was kind of sad, but also how he took it and used it as fuel to move forward, to still do the work he's doing now. And in some ways a greater work, I think, like scope wise, was inspiring. So definitely a great episode. And so I'm looking forward to this one now. So,
well, yeah, speaking of where the rubber hits
about
the
who
road.
We got today.
Yeah, so Brandon, full disclosure,
Right.
has been a close friend for a number of years, and we've been on some worldwide adventures together, which we may get to talking about today. But I think, Brandon, we'd love for you to tell listeners and viewers a little bit about your background. But first, in addition to the sort of professional qualifications that David mentioned earlier, being on the faculty of Phillips Exeter Academy and coaching football and wrestling, really where the rubber hits the road for you is your role as a teacher and as a professional educator in the Department of Health and Human Development. So, if there are any students who graduate from Phillips Exeter Academy who still have questions about sex or drugs, it's obviously it's your fault.
Yeah, right.
But no, I mean, who better to inform us about sort of the state of mind of bright young people than our guest today, Brandon Thomas. So tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll dive right in.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for having me on. It's always fun to connect with you. Really cool to be. Born and raised Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So left grad school and was kind of trying to figure life out. And I had always been someone who had a relatively large personality, so I picked the weirdest place I could find to move to. I left South Carolina and actually moved to Grand Forks, North Dakota. Worked for the university there for a little while. Left there, moved to New Hampshire. Been here for 7 years now, which shocks me more than it shocks anybody else, being a young black guy. So it's been an interesting journey, but a fun journey. But I think, I consider myself a citizen of the world. 46 states, 22, 21 countries. Just really enjoying life and trying to see and do as much as I possibly can. And it's been a wild ride. Maybe at the end of this, I can tell you some funny stories about me and Chris across the world.
Well, so I didn't realize you'd been to that many. You just say you've traveled to 46 of the 50 states, and
46, Iowa,
and 22,
Alaska, Hawaii.
Wow.
Alaska, Hawaii is easy. The Iowa and the Arkansas is hard.
Well, so
of that, I'm sure, for a number of reasons.
And so talk about that, because, this is, I don't know that I know anyone who's that well traveled, especially with regard to the focus of this series, which is anti-Black racism and social justice. Give us a few anecdotes, and just because I have such a loud voice, speak up so that your microphone captures you and we don't lose any of your precious audio.
Absolutely.
What's it been like to do so much traveling?
It's been amazing, unique, and difficult. Like all of the adjectives, right? It's all of the above. Just because you see so much. Some of it, which you absolutely love, right? You meet people in places that you never thought you would meet. You eat things that you never thought were on a menu. You see things that look a bit awkward, right? To someone in North Dakota, eating an engine block is normal. To someone from South Carolina, that's foreign. To someone in New England, having central AC is an amenity. To someone in South Carolina, that's a different thing. I think the beautiful thing about traveling, for me at least, is realizing how local everything is. Like a lot of things are unique to you because of where you are. And whether I'm living in California, right, where the natural disaster I'm thinking about may be an earthquake or a fire, or I'm living in South Carolina and it's a hurricane, right? And it's so funny because depending on where you live is always like what you're worried about. It's like,
Right.
oh, like I'm from South Carolina, so like I'm like, oh, a hurricane? Oh, that's easy. But as soon as somebody says tornado, I'm like, wait a minute. What if you hang out in the Midwest? They're like, oh, it's just a twister. Like, you'll see one tomorrow. I'm like, no. You know what I mean? And when we talk about things relative to race, right? Like when you go to these different places, like the one thing you can't escape is, the history of the United States of America. And you just realize, right, how vast it is, right? Traveling around and being around different cities in Asia and Europe, right? A 6-hour drive, I might not even be able to get, out of New England. But a 6-hour drive in Europe, you might, depending on where you are, you can hit 4 or 5 different countries. And so the where that could take you, right? If I'm in Iowa or if I'm driving 6 hours in Arkansas, like you may end up in a place where no one looks like you, where you may look a bit out of place, or where someone hasn't seen someone who's looked like you in a very long time. And that can change, the way in which you comport yourself, right? Do I really want to get out of the car at this gas station? Should I just hang out and only go out in the big city? Whenever I do go out, is there something for me to do? Is there a community nearby? Right? All questions you have to consistently ask yourself. But nevertheless, like it's still amazing just to see it, right? It's one thing to be able to like think about things and dream. It's another thing to be able to go there and see those things for yourself.
Well, do you see like a difference in I think it's great because I hadn't thought about some of the differences like in the things you'd have to think about, but I haven't been to as many states as you nearly, and I do recognize that because I'm from St. Louis, and so things like tornadoes and stuff, were like, okay, yeah, it's tornado season, but then you think about people, I used to say, why would they live where there's a hurricane? That's ridiculous, it's just so, and the same with California and the earthquakes and everything. Why don't they move? But I wonder about your experiences with people, and since we're talking about racism, like, have you seen it where it's expressed differently, in different places that you've been, since you've been to just about all the states?
It's so interesting because anytime you ask people from a place about people, they always say the same thing. Oh my God, they're so nice, right? Mm-hmm. So in the South is Southern hospitality, and in some areas of the Midwest, like I remember being in Minnesota, and it's called like Minnesota nice. And then we go to the West Coast, and it's like, oh yeah, you always meet a friend in California, and it's like, oh okay, right? But like they don't say like you meet a friend that is also white. You meet a friend that is also Latinx, right? They kind of keep those markers off of it. And I'll say this: the one beautiful thing about the South is, immediately when you are not welcome, right? In the Deep South especially, you know immediately when you're not welcome. What I've noticed in a lot of other places in the country, more so Northeast, is the outward racism that doesn't exist as much, but it's much more hidden and much more systemic in nature. And that's my experience, right? I think, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, it's been a lot more behind closed doors. A lot of people who don't say a whole lot, but when you hear things or when you feel that something hasn't gone your way and you dig a little bit deeper, there's some things that maybe seem a bit shady. So I think there are certain parts of the country who are very proud of who they are, their history, and what they stand for. And there are other parts of the country who really do a really good job of masking some of the things that they don't want to change. And I think you attribute a large part of change. Change is hard for us all. I think the pandemic hasn't showed us anything. I think it showed us that, adjusting is really tough, right? Why do I have to wear a mask? It's not comfortable. I can't breathe. Like, do I cough in it? Do I not? What kind of mask do I wear? I mean, it's the constant adjusting. And I think that transcends, race, right? Like whenever you see your community and you have this vision of what it looks like, and then it instantly becomes and starts to look a bit different. It's like, wait, but this isn't what I thought it was. and it's really unique. And to take that on a global perspective, I think and this is my personal opinion, I think in America we're extremely spoiled in the sense that like we can legitimately live next to someone who is both Indian, Chinese, Italian, Puerto Rican, Colombian. Like we can have all of those same people in the same neighborhood, and we don't blink. We're like, oh, just a cool neighborhood. Whereas a lot of other countries are extremely racially homogenous, right? You have in certain parts of China, like everybody is Chinese. It's like no, 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 it's not. Oh yeah, that guy's from Senegal. Oh, you know what? That guy's from Italy. Oh, you know what? That guy's from Northern Ireland. Oh yeah, he's from Martinique. No. Everybody was born in that neighborhood, lived in that neighborhood, and they stayed there their entire life. And I think we take it for granted on a daily basis that we can walk outside of our houses, and just see someone that looks completely different. You know what I mean? I'll never forget being in China, and I'm going to the mall, and I'm on the escalator, and a parent has their kid like in their arms. The kid is like sleeping. The parent like shakes the kid, wakes the kid up. Look at him. Like, my God, that guy from the television. And it was in that moment that you start to process it, and your first reaction coming from America is like, "What? You staring at me? I can't. I leave America, and I'm dealing with the same BS. All right, here we go." But when you dig a little bit deeper, you're like, okay, wow. Like the reason why is because this country has billions of people, and it's not a lot of people that look like me. So it just makes you consider things, and I think that's the beautiful thing about traveling and being able to see different things. It helps you process, and it gives you a different filter and a different lens to be able to look at life.
In a way, that seems like that would sadden me more, because like listening to you, I would think that especially by now, and I do understand, the historical perspective, but especially by now, that the fact that you can do that and that you would take it for granted that you'll see somebody different, it looks like by now we would be more accepting of that. You know what I mean? But instead, it doesn't feel like that at all, and it would be more understandable if you hardly ever saw somebody who looked like this. You know what I mean? But the fact that you can, and that that this country is supposed to be more about that, and we run into like such a resistance, for that at this age of the country is kind of a sad thing, I think. And thinking about it as you're talking,
Yeah, and I oftentimes wonder about that as well, right? And so, and this is the way I process it in my mind, and it's about exposure. So I think we think about exposure in terms of like, okay, what we see and what we read about and all these different things. But I think I read a stat one time, and it was a study, and it was like 70% of people never live more than 60 miles away from where they grew up, right? So if you think about that on a larger scale, and I'm from Iowa, one of the states I have, and you and 4 generations of your family have never left this 200-mile radius, right? That exposure shapes like how you see the world. Okay, maybe you go on a cruise, maybe you take a vacation to Europe every 5 years or something like that. But the levels of exposure from having never left that spot, right? It's the same thing as someone who lives in China and never leaves that neighborhood, right? And how I process it is, if we don't continuously expose ourselves to different people, different ideals, we become a little bit more insular. Not because we hate or because we dislike, but just because like that's our worldview. Like this is how we process the world, and we don't have that lens or these different valves in which to see the world through, right? It becomes a little bit more insular. And so my whole life's mission, at least for me, is to get as many lenses and valves as I possibly can, because in that way, then as a teacher, I'm able to explain things from a different perspective. I think one of my shortcomings as a teacher is being from the South. I think I look at things very much black and white, right? For me, whenever I think about race and race relations, it's like American racism, black, white, that's it, right? But it's so much more complex than that, right? we got Latinx, we got Asian, we got a lot of different things going on. And I think, as I read, as I expose myself, as I put myself in those different situations, right, I start to get those different things.
I have to say, as your friend and colleague, it's one of the things that I most admire about you, Brandon, and the way that you set an example in how you educate yourself, which is, as you were saying, exposure. And I have benefited a great deal from the workshops that we've done at school, from conversations that we've had around anti-Black racism this year, every Thursday. I've learned so much talking with David, interviewing people on this show. And none of it carries the educative power of living in different places. To disabuse someone of a stereotype, or to get back in touch with your own humility, or I think, and again, it's another way that you set a really good example for me anyway, is until you have reason to believe otherwise, you expect the best from other people. And especially not always having been treated kindly in your life, you are still wanting to extract that from other people. And I think just the fact that you've done so much traveling is evidence of that. But I want to round out the story of being in the mall in China, because I was with you then, and Brandon and I were working for this summer school. And I had said, when I think you remember the conversation that we had prior to your signing on, I really don't think there are any other Black faculty or staff or kids, and you were like, that's cool. I mean, same attitude that you have now, I want to check it out. And when we went to the mall, and I remember that mother waking up her kid, look. And then I remember a couple of other kids coming up to you who thought that you were Kobe Bryant. And you remember that, and you're ready to sign an autograph. You're like, yeah, okay, that's going to cost you 1,000 yuan, but yeah, I'll sign your sneakers if you want me to. But and it's you I would have totally understood if you'd gone away mad, but instead you recognize the situation not as racism. But I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I remember you saying is what you said a minute or two ago, which is it's lack of exposure. I mean, I don't even look like Kobe Bryant, but that's all that they've got as a reference. And if I may, fast forward 8 weeks later, and I was no longer in China, but you still were, and I asked you a bit. You were in 3 different cities. So after being in Changshu, and then Hong Kong, and then you were in Beijing, and you said, well, there is one thing that's starting to wear on me, and that is when at the end of the week or two, when parents come to gather up their kids, instead of asking me about the course I was teaching, they want to take a picture with me. And it seems like more with me than the other teachers. And, I'm not sure how I feel about that. Can you talk about how you conceptualize that? If people are inspired listening to this, okay, I want to travel more than I do. What was that particular experience like of being photographed? And then what would you say to anyone who anticipates they'll be a minority in the place where they're going? And maybe that's Brandon's, top 5 race-related travel tips. But first of all, what was being photographed like, and how did you handle that emotionally?
It's really interesting, and I think I approach it differently, and I suggest everybody approach it in the way in which they want. Know that you will be sensationalized in a way, right? And I think largely because of lack of exposure.
Yeah.
So in that moment, you're going to have to make a lot of decisions. And for me, how I processed it was, I may be the only American they meet, and I don't want anyone to leave and say, "Hey, listen, I met a Black American and they weren't." Right? One thing that the United States has taught me is that people can attach a lot with just one person. Right? Whenever a Black person does something, it's not just that Black person, it's all of them. Right? And so one thing that I said, I was like, I'm not going to give me or any other Black person in America a bad name. And so I was very gracious, sometimes more gracious than I would have liked to have been. But also, I felt like, I feel like, at least, a lot of people who come into America get these stereotypes, unfair or unfair. And I thought a lot of them were unfair, right? I think that as a country, I think we put a lot of stereotypes on different people. And I think that probably goes the other way as well. So for me, I took a myth busting route, and I said, all right, cool. This is maybe what you think Americans are, but this is what I'm going to be. And I'll never forget the times that people will walk up and just say hello and want pictures. And a lot of it, in my heart of hearts, I truly believe was because like people were curious. It's like, wow, you got this country that's supposed to be one of the best in the world. They have this extraordinary amount of wealth. There's so many cool things, right? You can say what you want. You can do what you want. Like, let me see what this is all about. Yeah. And I embrace that. At a point, when you feel like it's a bit much, when everybody just wants a picture, or you kind of feel like it's a show. And not that I was a celebrity, but the same way in which they feel, it's like you just want me as a prop. I think you should always take care of yourself, but just understand that whenever you're somewhere else and it's new and it's different, there's some things that come with that, right? In the same way that I was pretty popular, is the same way that people want pictures and I'm a prop, right? But the flip side of that is I went to Africa and I was instantly in the majority, and I disappeared, and that felt amazing. And I loved it. I got off the plane and somebody was like, "Welcome home." And I was like, "Oh,
wow,
done." Close up shop. I feel amazing, right? And it was 90-10 the other way, and it felt so beautiful just to be like, oh, wait, the eyes aren't on me. Oh, this is how I can get used to this. And so, life is ups and downs, gifts and curses, and highs and lows, peaks and valleys, right? In certain situations, you're going to be up. In certain situations, you're going to be down. And that doesn't change no matter where you are. And I'm just really happy that I have the emotional fortitude to be able to handle it and be as gracious as possible. But I understand that everybody may not approach it that way, and that's okay. But just understand that I think a lot of it comes from ignorance and not from a place of balance.
Can you talk a little bit about... go ahead, David. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I speaking to that as far as like me thinking about how I would feel in that situation. I didn't have that one. I had a very minor version of that one time. I was at a place in Minnesota. It's a small town, and I was at a gas station, and this girl I had never met before came up to me and asked me if she could touch my hair. And I looked at her, and I thought that was like at that time the strangest question I had ever heard. But when I looked at her, in her face, she had no malice. She was dead serious, and she was as serious as she was. She was equally curious. She really had never really been exposed and wanted to know. And the people I was with explained to me that there was one, and I put black in quotes, person in the town. Relative to that person, I was the blackest person they had ever seen. That person was a mixed race person, so they were black, but they were, they were given some sort of caveats because they had white parents. But I was like black, and so they had never seen that. So then they're like, "Can I?" And it was the day I shaved my hair. I'm just kidding. I didn't. The point is, but I did. I told her that I wasn't comfortable with that. And I tried to politely explain to her that I wasn't like a walking museum. So when I'm listening to you, I'm reminded of that and of that feeling that I don't know. I think that where I would kind of understand some of that being in a different country, some of what's been done in this country in my experience here would make that difficult for me, especially where it's constant. That was one time and that stayed with me. But for it to be constant and I'm not Kobe, you know what I mean, would be now if I'm on the Kobe level, yeah, what outside you, yeah, you go take the piece of cheese, but if I'm not, and you're only doing it because because what it is me being black is somehow a novelty for you, and it's not for me. For me, it's potentially, especially when I go back home, life or death. And so it's interesting. I think what you did and how you handled it was admirable and great. I was just thinking about it while I was listening to you, and I was reminded of that Minnesota experience, and I was thinking, man, I'm not sure how I would have, how I would have dealt. I like to think I would have dealt with it in much the same way that you did, but I have to be reminded that with that one young lady, I didn't say, well, there you go, you got 5 seconds. I was just kind of like, nah, I'm not really with that. Of course, I was also younger and a little more what they might call militant, But I think I did good by not giving her the full speech. You cannot touch the black man's hair because I didn't go into my whole Malcolm on it. But anyway, I commend you. But I think it would be difficult to not take your experience from the U.S. into a situation where it may be just because they've never seen before, and they're like, well, how do I react to that? So
yeah, it's interesting. It speaks to something that all three of us have discussed in different combinations before.
I'm sorry, wait, let me ask Chris something. I'm just curious. So you were there at the mall, and this may be like a gut check ego thing for you, because I know you're used to being a celebrity, but
nobody ever asked to touch
no
my
one
hair.
Was trying to
nobody
take pictures
ever
of you or touch your hair. What?
Nobody ever asked that.
Nobody wanted to touch. Oh,
nobody.
That's difficult to believe. That's just but that's interesting too, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because in a place where you mainly see, Chinese people,
right?
You know what I mean? Everybody's Chinese. You would think that if they saw Americans, period, that some of that would be, the novelty. But I guess you see more white Americans than you do black Americans.
Yeah, for sure. At least, particularly in Changshu, which is a smaller city compared to, Hong Kong is super international and probably not a great comparison to the rest of mainland China. But it's, and the smaller the city, the fewer tourists ever get there. And you really go from interesting to a standout novelty. But in answer to your question, how did I feel? I felt like I really wanted to come to Brandon's defense if he needed it, but I wasn't exactly sure how to do that. I was, I thought to myself, well, Chris, you did have a discussion with Brandon about the other times that you'd been in China, and did he anticipate being comfortable being the only black person in not just the group of faculty, but the school and the town? And it wasn't going to be until maybe Hong Kong, but then again, not in Beijing. And you can tell from, Brandon's attitude that he was up for it, but that didn't change the fact that when it was, we would be in a taxi. It's not Uber in China, it's Didi, and we were at a stoplight. Mind you, we had the windows up just because there was air conditioning in the car, and people next to us were rolling down the windows and telling us, like, roll down your window. And I said, Brandon, anytime you want to, like, I don't know what, quit or have me sit by the window, and you can sit in the middle, just say the word, and you were having fun with people. But I and I told you this, I felt like responsible in some way, but there was nothing I could do really. So it was uncomfortable for me. But as long as I believed that, as you said, and I think it's true, that people were, for lack of exposure, truly interested, and you didn't feel, except maybe at the end with a lot of photographs, objectified. I mean, I was okay with it. It doesn't compare to the way that I'm objectified in China, or the differences in what people expect in terms of personal space. I mean, now I'm painting this with an extremely broad brush, but with, I think generally speaking, as a culture, that Chinese people are more willing to take pictures and stare at things that are of interest to them than, on average, an American person would be. Again, very broad brush, but that was also a cultural difference. It's complicated to disentangle what is cultural and should be tolerated, what is, discrimination and shouldn't be. And I know that you have to teach in about 5 minutes, Brandon, but I want to get your take on some of the views of your students with regard to social justice, and give us a pulse of 14 to 18-year-olds that you come in contact with.
So I think this summer has been unique for a lot of different ways, but I think the biggest ways in which I have saw a change is in the language that students are operating with. I mean, just over the last year, the language in which students come to class with versus last year, just completely different. The way in which people are currently speaking about race and class currently, right now in class, it's night and day. I feel like it's emboldened a lot of people, right? I think in the way in which people who don't believe in anti-racism or racism are speaking is a little bit louder. But I think the ways in which kids are talking about systemic racism, anti-immigration, injustice, it's amazing, and it's really giving me a lot of hope, because if I got a class of 14 kids and 12 of them are like, not only do I know what anti-racist means, but also Black Lives Matter, and it's like, oh wow, if I had said that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they'd have been like, well, like, Kaepernick probably shouldn't have taken a knee. Like, it's about the flag. Like, he should stand up. And like the rhetoric is just completely different now. So I'm really encouraged. And I'm wondering, like, wow, like, really, did that summer really do this much, right? For me, I think, following the kids on Snapchat and Instagram, just kind of following the trends, I thought it was kind of like, oh, they picked it up and they put it down. But what I'm realizing is I didn't give them enough credit in terms of what they were taking in, right? Just because they aren't talking about it at this moment doesn't mean they didn't learn it and it didn't mean something to them. So I think the stakes have raised, and I think our future is in solid hands in terms of the things that they'll demand. I think some things that people have been quiet about, that'll adjust and that'll change, and they won't be quiet about it anymore. And I think as a society, the level in which we have to get to, or in the way in which we need to treat people, that's going up. The things that maybe my generation, my parents' generation tolerated in terms of racial dynamics, I don't think this generation is going to tolerate it. And I think not only will the Black kids or the Black indigenous people of color see things as bad. But also, I think a lot of white people are like, nah, did you hear what they just said? This is what we need. And I think that's the beauty in it. The beauty in it is that a lot of people are getting together. And I'm a little surprised. I'm really encouraged. And I'm hoping we don't lose this momentum. And I don't know if we'll ever get back to this, like, oh yeah. I mean, at one point we were like, oh, we're in a post-racial society. And it's like, oh, here we go. You know what I mean? And you don't want to ever get back there. But this momentum that we're carrying right now with these 14-year-olds legitimately have language around social justice. They have platforms. They're sharing things. I had a class this morning. They were like, no, like, we like the anti-racist block that we have at our institution, but we want something actionable. I want to go and do something myself. And like when you start hearing things like that, you're like, okay, all right, cool. Well, I can get behind this.
So what can you do then if like they're demanding that and they want that? And I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I mean, have you thought about, or are you already engaged in some things with them to take that energy that they have and do something with it as a class or as a, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. A huge proponent of prison reform and making sure that people aren't spending time in prison that they can't. I'm always sending them different things about, different bail systems and different people who are unlawfully in prison for bad things. So I try to channel not channel my classes like, oh, if you get Mr. Thomas's class, we're going to talk about prison reform. But no, I just really try to, like, if people are extremely passionate about it, I'm just pointing towards, well, here's something that I really enjoy and that I like. You have to find what you're passionate about in your lane in this space, right? And I really encourage my kids. I say my kids. I don't have any kids, by the way, but my students to really,
growth mindset. Yeah,
I really encourage them to figure out what they're passionate about, and then tie that into how they can see justice, right? If you're passionate about the environment, I can take you to a lot of places where environmentally, like, the place has been decimated relative to race. If you're passionate about food, right? What about food justice and food deserts? If you're passionate about sports, it's easy to see what's going on. You channel whatever it is that you love and really say, all right, let me take this anti-racist lens and apply it to that and see how I can make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what makes you a great teacher. And it's a beautiful note to end on. I think inspirational, seriously, for all of us. I mean, the best teachers are not delivering content. They are channeling passions, as you said, and getting people excited and getting them connected. And I share your optimism. I think as a clinician, hearing the sorts of things that are stirred up in people, my experience this year is that students are more willing to talk about their experiences around race and class and other kinds of social injustice, and they have the vocabulary. And I hope that, as a faculty and, more broadly, that as adults, the three of us and our, friends and family can also be great listeners and help kids channel, their passions in really productive ways, that will result in some lasting change. I mean, fingers crossed. But thank you for being a guest on I'm Black, You're White, Now What? I think we got a great answer to the now what part, because you're doing such amazing work. So Brandon, thank you. And I hope that your class goes well and that you come back on the show, because there's so much more to talk about.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time, guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to I'm Black, You're White, Now What?
You can find more episodes on the podcast channel Teaching What It Takes, available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify.
To learn more about the work I do, visit www.preparingthepath.com.
And to learn more about the work I do, visit drchristhurber.com.